If you look at what happened between Washington and Ottawa last night, it doesn't look like an escalation. It doesn't look like a next step. It looks like the point of no return. For 2 weeks, the world watched Donald Trump and Mark Carney trade blows across the longest border in the world. Tariffs, retaliations, alliances being built and broken in real time. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous, but there was still a thread of hope that someone would pick up the phone, that some back channel would open, that the adults would step in before the damage became permanent. That thread just snapped because last night at approximately 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, Donald Trump signed something that hasn't been used against an ally since 1941. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act against Canada, not against Iran, not against North Korea, not against Russia, against Canada. He froze Canadian government financial assets held in U.S. institutions. He ordered American banks to flag and delay all transactions with Canadian crown corporations. And he gave U.S. Customs a directive to begin what the White House is calling enhanced processing of all Canadian goods at every land port of entry along the northern border. In plain English, he just turned the U.S.-Canada border into a wall. Not a physical wall, a financial wall, a wall made of paperwork and delays and frozen accounts, designed to strangle the Canadian economy into submission. And the timing was deliberate. He did it at midnight. He did it while the markets were closed. He did it while most of America was asleep, because he didn't want you to see the reaction in real time. He wanted to control the narrative in the morning. He wanted to wake up, post on Truth Social, and frame this as strength, as decisive leadership, as America First in action. But he miscalculated. Again, because while Trump was signing executive orders in the Oval Office, Mark Carney was already on a plane, not to Washington, not to New York, to London. And what happened when he landed is going to reshape the global financial system for a generation. Trump is spiraling, the dollar is falling, and the media is still 3 steps behind. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what Carney did when he landed in London, why 7 central banks issued emergency statements in the middle of the night, and why the world you thought you understood no longer exists. So let me walk you through exactly what happened, hour by hour, because the sequence matters. The timing matters. And when you see how precisely Carney orchestrated this response, you will understand that this man isn't reacting to Trump. He is 3 moves ahead of him. He has been 3 moves ahead of him from the beginning. Let's start at 11:47 p.m. Eastern. That's when the executive order was signed. Within minutes, the text leaked, not from the White House, from the banking sector. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Citigroup all received the compliance directives simultaneously. And someone inside one of those banks, we don't know who, sent the full text to the Financial Times. By midnight, it was on every terminal, on every trading desk in London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. The world knew before America woke up. Now, here's where it gets interesting. At 12:15 a.m. Eastern, the Bank of Canada issued an emergency statement, not a press release, not a tweet, a formal central bank communication to all G7 central banks and the International Monetary Fund. The statement said, and I'm reading directly from the text, the government of the United States has taken unilateral action to weaponize the international financial system against a NATO ally and G7 partner. The Bank of Canada is activating all bilateral and multilateral stabilization mechanisms to ensure the integrity of Canadian financial markets and the protection of Canadian assets held abroad. Read that language carefully. Weaponize the international financial system. That is not diplomatic language. That is war language. That is a central bank telling the world that the United States just crossed a line that was supposed to be sacred, the line that says you don't use the financial system as a weapon against your own allies. That line exists for a reason. It exists because the entire global economy is built on trust. Trust that the U.S. dollar is safe. Trust that U.S. banks are neutral. Trust that if you park your money in New York, it won't be seized because of a political dispute. Trump just shattered that trust. Not for Canada, for everyone. At 1:30 a.m. Eastern, the first domino fell. The Swiss National Bank issued a brief statement expressing grave concern about the precedent being set. At 1:45, the Bank of Japan followed. By 2 a.m., the European Central Bank had convened an emergency call. By 3 a.m., 7 central banks had issued statements. 7 in the middle of the night. That has never happened. Not during the 2008 financial crisis, not during COVID, not during Brexit, never. 7 central banks don't wake up their governors at 2 a.m. unless someone has set the house on fire. And that's exactly what Trump did. At 4:30 a.m. Eastern, Mark Carney landed at Heathrow. He was met on the tarmac, not at the terminal, on the tarmac by the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Governor of the Bank of England. There were no cameras allowed, no press pool, just 3 people standing on wet asphalt in the dark, having a conversation that will probably be studied in textbooks for the next 50 years. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know what happened next. At 6 a.m. Eastern, the London Stock Exchange opened, and within the first 30 minutes, something unprecedented occurred. The Bank of England announced that it would accept Canadian government bonds as Tier 1 collateral in its lending facilities. If you're not a finance person, let me translate that. The Bank of England just told the world that it considers Canadian government debt to be as safe and trustworthy as British government debt. It gave Canada a financial lifeline that completely bypasses the U.S. banking system. It means that even if every single U.S. bank freezes every single Canadian account, Canada can still borrow, still trade, still function because London just opened its vault and said, come on in. This is massive. This is the kind of thing that reshapes the global financial architecture for decades. And it happened before most Americans had their morning coffee. But Carney wasn't done. He wasn't even close to done. At 7 a.m. Eastern, still in London, Carney appeared at a hastily arranged press conference at 10 Downing Street, standing next to the British Prime Minister. And he announced the second phase of what he is now calling the Sovereignty Coalition. Remember the first phase? The emergency partnership with the EU, the Pacific Energy Accord with Japan and South Korea, the digital alliance that excluded the United States. That was phase 1. That was the economic bypass. Phase 2 is different. Phase 2 is military. Carney announced that Canada is entering into a new bilateral defense framework with the United Kingdom. Shared intelligence, joint naval patrols in the Arctic, mutual basing rights, and here is the part that made the Pentagon lose its mind. The agreement includes a clause that allows Canadian military procurement to be redirected away from U.S. defense contractors and toward British and European suppliers. Do you understand what that means? Canada spends billions every year on American-made military equipment. Fighter jets, naval vessels, surveillance systems. That money flows directly into the U.S. defense industrial base, into Lockheed Martin, into Raytheon, into Boeing's defense division, into factories in Texas and Georgia and California. Carney just threatened to turn off that tap, and he did it standing next to the leader of America's other closest ally. The message wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be subtle. The message was, you are losing your friends, not one at a time, all at once. Receipt number 1. Lockheed Martin stock dropped 4% in pre-market trading. Raytheon dropped 3%. Boeing's defense division, already struggling, took another hit. The defense sector collectively lost $18 billion in market value before the New York Stock Exchange even opened. Now, let me take you inside the White House at this point, because according to multiple reports from people inside the building, the mood shifted from confident to panicked in about 90 minutes. At midnight, when the executive order was signed, the atmosphere was celebratory. Trump's inner circle believed they had delivered a knockout blow. They expected Canada to cave by morning. They expected Carney to call. They expected a groveling press conference from Ottawa where Canada accepted all of Trump's demands. By 3 a.m., when the central bank statement started rolling in, the celebration stopped. By 5 a.m., when the Bank of England announcement hit, senior advisors were reportedly arguing in the hallway outside the Oval Office. By 7 a.m., when Carney appeared at Downing Street and announced the defense pivot, someone in the National Security Council allegedly said, and this is being reported by 3 separate outlets, "We just lost the Commonwealth." Think about that phrase. We just lost the Commonwealth of nations, 56 countries, 2.5 billion people. A third of the world's population, connected by history, by language, by legal systems, by trade networks that predate the United States itself. And the man who used to run the Bank of England, who has personal relationships with finance ministers and central bankers across that entire network, just activated it against the United States. Trump's response came at 8:15 a.m. It was a post on Truth Social, all caps. Carney is a globalist traitor working with foreign powers to undermine America. Canada will pay the price. we will win. That was it. That was the response. No strategy, no counteroffer, no diplomacy, just rage, just all caps rage from a man who woke up to discover that the world had reorganized overnight and he wasn't invited to the meeting. But here's what happened next that nobody is talking about. And this is the part that should genuinely frighten you. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern, the New York Stock Exchange opened. The Dow Jones fell 800 points in the first 12 minutes. The S&P 500 dropped 2.5% before hitting a circuit breaker that temporarily halted trading. The 10-year Treasury yield spiked as foreign holders began selling. And the U.S. dollar, the reserve currency of the world, the foundation of American economic power, dropped against every major currency simultaneously. The dollar didn't just weaken, it cracked. It fell against the euro. It fell against the pound. It fell against the yen. It fell against the Swiss franc. It even fell against the Canadian dollar. The currency of the country Trump was trying to crush actually gained value against the currency of the country doing the crushing. Let that sink in. Trump weaponized the financial system to destroy Canada's economy, and the market responded by betting against America. Why? Because the market isn't stupid. The market understands something Trump doesn't. The U.S. dollar's dominance isn't based on military power. It isn't based on GDP. It's based on trust. Trust that the United States will play by the rules. Trust that the financial system will be neutral. Trust that if you hold dollars, if you buy treasuries, if you run your trade through New York, you are safe from political interference. Trump just proved that you're not safe. He proved that any country, even your closest ally, can wake up one morning and find its assets frozen because the president had a bad night. And every finance minister, every central banker, every sovereign wealth fund manager on earth just watched that happen and thought the same thing. If he did it to Canada, he can do it to me. I need to diversify. I need alternatives. I need to reduce my exposure to the U.S. dollar. That thought, that single thought, multiplied across 10,000 decision makers in 100 countries, is more dangerous to American power than any army. Because when the world stops trusting the dollar, the United States loses the ability to borrow cheaply. It loses the ability to run deficits. It loses the ability to fund its military. It loses everything that makes it a superpower. And that process started this morning, not as a theory, not as a warning, as a market reality. The dollar fell, the treasuries sold. The trust cracked, and it happened because Donald Trump couldn't tolerate being told no by a Canadian. And honestly, covering all of this changed me personally. When you watch assets get frozen overnight and entire financial systems get weaponized, you start thinking differently about your own money. At least I did. I had to find ways to protect myself and maintain financial freedom. So while on the search about ways to make income on the side a few months ago, I got into Forex trading specifically because no single government controls that market. The same moves I'm reporting on right now, I'm trading. It's how I stay free as an independent journalist. I recommend you find ways to protect yourself as well. In fact, if you're curious about the winning trading method I use, I will leave it in the description. But let's move on because there's something the media is completely ignoring. Let's talk about what's happening in Canada right now, because the story inside Canada is almost as dramatic as the story on the world stage. When Trump signed the executive order last night, Canadians weren't asleep. Social media exploded. The hashtag #StandWithCanada trended worldwide within an hour. But what's remarkable isn't the anger, it's the unity. Canadians are not unified people politically. They argue about everything. Quebec versus the rest, West versus East, Indigenous rights, climate policy, healthcare funding. On any given day, Canadian politics is a loud, messy, contentious fight. But as of this morning, that fight is over. Every single provincial premier, every one, from the Conservative Premier of Alberta to the Progressive Premier of British Columbia, issued statements supporting Carney's response. Every single one. The leader of the opposition, who 2 weeks ago was calling Carney a reckless liberal, held a press conference this morning and said, "This is not a time for partisanship. This is a time for Canada." You need to understand how extraordinary that is. Canadian Conservatives supporting a Liberal Prime Minister unconditionally. This doesn't happen. This has never happened, not during free trade negotiations, not during softwood lumber disputes, not during any previous confrontation with the United States. Trump didn't just unite Canada's government, he united Canada's soul. He gave 40 million people a common enemy, and that enemy is him. The economic data is already reflecting this. Canadian consumer confidence, which had been declining for 3 quarters, spiked overnight. Surveys conducted this morning show that 78% of Canadians support retaliatory measures against the United States, even if it means short-term economic pain. 78%. In a country that normally can't agree on what to have for lunch, 78% of people just said, bring it on. Trump created the one thing no Canadian leader has ever been able to create: national consensus. And Carney is riding that wave like a surfer who has been waiting his entire life for this swell. His approval ratings, which were mediocre a month ago, are now above 70%. He is the most popular Canadian Prime Minister since Pierre Trudeau in 1968. And he's achieving that popularity not by promising people things, but by standing up to the most powerful man on earth and refusing to blink. Canadians don't need a tax cut right now. They don't need a new program. They need to feel like their country matters. And Carney is giving them that feeling. But let me be clear about something. This isn't just emotion. This isn't just flag-waving nationalism. Carney has the receipts. He always has the receipts. While the politicians rally and the public cheers, the technocrat in Carney is executing a plan that is surgically precise. Let me show you what I mean. In the last 24 hours, Canada has activated bilateral currency swap agreements with the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. These swaps allow Canada to access foreign currency directly without going through U.S. dollar markets. This is a financial bunker. It means that even if Trump escalates further, even if he tries to cut Canada off from the U.S. dollar entirely, Canada has alternative lifelines already in place. The pipes are built, the valves are open. Canada can survive without the U.S. financial system, not comfortably, not easily, but they can survive. Meanwhile, Carney's team has quietly filed challenges at the World Trade Organization, the International Court of Justice, and under the dispute resolution mechanisms of 3 separate trade agreements. These filings aren't just legal maneuvers. They're strategic positioning. Every filing generates headlines. Every headline reinforces the narrative that the United States is acting as a rogue state. Every time an international body agrees to hear Canada's case, it validates Carney's framing that this isn't a trade dispute. This is an assault on the rules-based international order. And here's the thing about the rules-based international order. The United States built it. After World War II, America created the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, NATO, the United Nations. America wrote the rules, and for 80 years, those rules served American interests beautifully. They created the framework for American dominance. They made the U.S. dollar the world's reserve currency. They gave Washington veto power over the global economy. And now Trump is tearing up the rule book that America wrote. He is destroying the system that made America powerful. It's like watching a man set fire to his own house because he's angry at his neighbor. The house is burning, and he's standing in the yard screaming about Canada while everything he built turns to ash. I want to pause here and talk about something that the media is completely ignoring: the human cost, not the market cost, not the GDP impact, the human cost. There are 400,000 people who cross the U.S.-Canada border every single day for work. Every single day. These aren't abstract economic statistics. These are real people. Nurses who live in Windsor and work in Detroit. Engineers who live in Buffalo and commute to Toronto. Truck drivers who cross back and forth 3 times a day hauling auto parts and food and medicine. As of this morning, the enhanced processing directive has turned every border crossing into a parking lot. Wait times at the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest commercial crossing in North America, hit 14 hours this morning. 14 hours. Truck drivers are sleeping in their cabs. Perishable goods are rotting in trailers. Factories on both sides of the border are shutting down production lines because parts aren't arriving. A hospital in Detroit reported this morning that they are running low on a specific radioisotope used in cancer treatment. That isotope is produced in a reactor in Ontario. It has a shelf life of 66 hours. It can't wait in a 14-hour customs line. If that isotope doesn't arrive, cancer patients in Michigan don't get their scans. Cancer patients in America being harmed by an American president's trade war with Canada. This is what happens when you turn a border into a weapon. People get hurt, not abstract people, not statistics. Real people with real diseases and real families who are being caught in the crossfire of a fight they didn't start and can't control. And it's happening in the other direction, too. Canadian hospitals that rely on specialized pharmaceuticals manufactured in the U.S. are reporting delays. Canadian farmers who export live cattle to U.S. processing plants are watching their animals stand in trucks at the border with no food and no water. Canadian families with children in American universities are panicking about tuition payments being frozen. This is the reality of economic warfare between neighbors. It isn't clean, it isn't surgical. It's brutal and messy, and it hurts the most vulnerable people. First, so let me now show you the 5 things that are going to happen in the next 72 hours. And I want you to pay close attention because each of these developments will directly affect your life, your money, and your future. Number 1. The Federal Reserve will be forced to intervene. The dollar's decline this morning was not orderly, it was chaotic. If it continues tomorrow, the Fed will have to make an emergency statement to reassure global markets. But here's the problem. What can the Fed say? They can't say the executive order is wrong. They can't contradict the president. They can't promise that U.S. financial institutions won't be used as political weapons again because the president just proved that they can. The Fed is trapped. They need to restore confidence without having any actual basis for confidence. Expect a carefully worded statement that says nothing and satisfies nobody, and expect the markets to see right through it. Number 2, Congress will erupt, not because members of Congress suddenly grew a spine, because their phones are ringing off the hook. Auto workers in Michigan are calling their representatives. Refinery workers in Texas are calling their senators. Tech executives in California are calling everyone. The economic pain is hitting the districts that matter. There are already reports of a bipartisan group of senators drafting a resolution to limit the president's ability to invoke emergency economic powers against allied nations. Will it pass? Probably not. Trump's loyalists in the Senate will block it. But the fact that it's being drafted tells you the cracks in the Republican wall are real. Number 3, the energy markets will spike. Canadian oil exports to the U.S. are already being disrupted by the border slowdown. Refineries in the Midwest are reporting that deliveries are arriving late or not at all. If this continues for another 48 hours, gas prices in the Great Lakes region will jump by 30 cents a gallon by the weekend. In some areas, you'll see lines at gas stations, not because there's a real shortage, because people will panic buy, and panic buying creates real shortages. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Trump's trade war will literally cause gas prices to spike in the states he needs to win. Number 4. Carney will announce phase 3. I don't know exactly what it will be, but based on the pattern, it will target another pressure point that the White House hasn't thought about. Carney has been methodical. Phase 1 was economic bypass. Phase 2 was defense realignment. Phase 3 will probably be financial. My best guess is that Canada will announce a formal review of its U.S. Treasury holdings. Canada holds roughly $250 billion in U.S. government debt. If Carney announces that Canada is considering diversifying those holdings away from U.S. Treasuries, the bond market will have a heart attack. He doesn't have to actually sell the bonds. He just has to say he's thinking about it. The threat alone will move markets. And that's Carney's superpower. He knows exactly which words, spoken at exactly the right time, will cause exactly the right amount of pain. Number 5, and this is the one that keeps me up at night. A third country will join the fight, not on Trump's side, on Carney's side. The most likely candidate is Mexico. President Claudia Sheinbaum has been quiet so far, but Mexico is facing its own tariff threats from Washington. If Mexico sees that Canada's strategy is working, if they see that standing up to Trump actually produces results, they will be tempted to join the coalition. And if Mexico joins, the entire North American trade system collapses simultaneously. You aren't looking at a trade dispute anymore. You're looking at the complete disintegration of the continental economy. Every factory, every supply chain, every just-in-time delivery system that was built over 30 years comes apart at the seams. Now, I want to address something that a lot of you are probably thinking. You're thinking, isn't Carney hurting Canada too? Isn't this self-destructive? And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Canada is going to suffer. The Canadian economy will take a hit. Jobs will be lost. Businesses will close. The short-term pain for Canada is real and significant. But Carney has made a calculation, and it's the same calculation that Churchill made in 1940 when Britain stood alone against a larger, stronger enemy. The calculation is this: short-term survival matters less than long-term sovereignty. If Canada folds now, if it accepts Trump's demands under this kind of pressure, it ceases to be an independent country in any meaningful sense. It becomes a vassal state. It becomes a country that exists at the pleasure of whoever occupies the White House. Every future president will know that all you have to do to get Canada to submit is threaten them hard enough. And that's not a country, that's a colony. Carney would rather take the economic hit now and preserve Canada's ability to make its own decisions forever than avoid the pain and lose independence permanently. That is a leader's calculation. You can disagree with it, you can think it's reckless, but you cannot say it isn't brave. And here's the strategic genius of it. Carney knows that time is on his side. Trump needs quick wins. Trump needs the news cycle to move on. Trump needs to claim victory and pivot to the next fight. But Carney doesn't need to win quickly. He just needs to not lose. Every day that passes without Canada surrendering is a victory for Carney. Every day the markets drop is pressure on Trump, not on Carney. Every day the border is clogged is a day that American manufacturers scream at their congressmen. Time is Carney's weapon, and he has more of it than Trump does. Trump's political clock is ticking. The midterms are coming. His poll numbers are dropping. His own party is getting nervous. He can't afford a 6-month trade war with Canada. He needs this resolved yesterday. But Carney can wait. Carney can absorb the pain. Carney has the public behind him. He has the world behind him. And he has the cold mathematical patience of a central banker who has spent his entire career managing crises that last years, not news cycles. Let me paint you the picture of where this ends, because I've been thinking about this all night, and I see 3 possible endings. Ending 1, the retreat. Trump finds a face-saving excuse to back down. Maybe he claims that Canada has agreed to major concessions that don't actually exist. Maybe he declares victory and revokes the executive order. Maybe a back-channel deal is struck where both sides agree to pretend this never happened. This is the best-case scenario. It requires Trump to swallow his pride, which is the one thing he has never done in his entire life. Probability, 20%. Ending 2, the freeze. Neither side backs down. The tariffs stay. The border stays clogged. The financial restrictions remain in place. Both economies bleed. The world fragments. We enter a new Cold War, not between the U.S. and China, but between the U.S. and its own allies. This Cold War doesn't have nuclear weapons. It has tariffs. It has frozen bank accounts. It has competing regulatory frameworks. It's slower than a real war, but it's just as destructive over time. This becomes the new normal, and normal is awful. Probability 50%, ending 3. The break, Trump escalates further. He expels Canadian diplomats. He closes the border entirely. He imposes secondary sanctions on any country that trades with Canada. The world retaliates. The global economy enters a recession. The U.S. dollar loses its reserve currency status, not in years, but in months. America becomes isolated, powerful but alone. Rich but friendless. The empire doesn't fall from attack. It falls from arrogance. Probability, 30%. I want that 30% number to scare you, because it should. A 30% chance of catastrophic global economic restructuring is not a small number. If I told you there was a 30% chance your house would burn down tonight, you wouldn't go to sleep. You'd grab the fire extinguisher. So where's our fire extinguisher? Who stops this? Not Trump. He started it and he doesn't know how to stop it. Not Carney. He's winning and he has no incentive to stop. Not Congress. They're too divided and too scared. The only force that can stop this is you, the people watching this video. The voters, the consumers, the workers, the people who are going to feel this in their gas tanks and their grocery bills and their retirement accounts. Here's what I know for certain. The relationship between the United States and Canada is not just damaged. It is fundamentally, structurally, perhaps permanently broken. The map we all grew up with, the one where these two countries are best friends, partners, family, that map is gone. Carney just redrew it. And the new map has lines on it that didn't exist a month ago. Lines between allies, lines between friends. Lines that will take a generation to erase, if they can be erased at all. I want to end with something that isn't about economics or politics or markets. I want to end with something personal. I have family in both countries. I have friends who cross that border every week. I grew up believing that the U.S.-Canada relationship was the one thing in this messy world that would never break. It was the bedrock. It was proof that two countries could share a border, share an economy, share a culture, and never, ever point a gun at each other. That belief died this week. It didn't die because of Mark Carney. It didn't die because of trade policy or tariffs or digital services taxes. It died because the President of the United States looked at his closest friend in the world and saw an enemy. He saw a target. He saw someone to dominate rather than someone to work with. And once you see your friend as an enemy, you can't unsee it. The damage is done. There will be a generation of Canadians who will never trust the United States again. And there will be a generation of Americans who will never understand why. That is the real cost of what happened last night. Not the billions in lost trade, not the stock market decline, not the falling dollar. The real cost is that two countries that loved each other just discovered that love isn't enough when one side decides to use power instead of partnership. This is the most dangerous moment in North American relations since the War of 1812. I am not exaggerating. I wish I were. What do you think? Can this be fixed, or is the damage permanent? Is Carney a visionary, or is he gambling with the future of two nations? And the question nobody in Washington wants to answer: what happens when the rest of the world decides it doesn't need America anymore? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And subscribe if you haven't already, because the markets close tomorrow, and based on what I'm seeing in the pre-market futures right now, it's going to be a bloodbath. I'll be back with a full breakdown the moment the closing bell rings. History is accelerating, and it's heading somewhere dark. Don't look away.